Welcome to the Uncommon Podcast, where we discuss real estate, entrepreneurship, leadership, and faith. Today, my co-host Sam Tewes and I will be discussing how we creatively structure real estate deals and give you a few examples of deals that we have done throughout our career. Let's get into it. So we're doing it. We're in. We're live.
Live action.
Live action. I think before we jump into talking about creative deals, let's give the people a little bit of background, who we are, what we've done. You're more interesting than I am, so why don't you get us started?
I don't know about that. Yeah, I can start. So I jumped into real estate out of a little bit of boredom. I was in the middle of playing baseball professionally. I was in the St. Louis Cardinals organization for a while and got bored in the off seasons just training. There was a little bit more to life than just going to the gym for a couple hours a day. So decided I wanted to start learning some real estate. Ended up going to a couple real estate meetups, some of the local ones we have here in Lincoln, Omaha, meeting a couple really good people, got under a couple people's wings, names I'm sure I'll mention later on in this podcast, but they really instructed me, brought me under their wing, and just started to teach me the ropes of the industry as a whole. So started with that. Fast forward 100 miles an hour. Now I'm directing an acquisition arm of a private equity group here in Omaha, 11 Wealth Capital, and really having fun with it. So that's kind of the short, and I'm sure we'll elaborate a little bit more as we go on as to, you know, some of those deals and how they creatively came about. But let's hear about you now. I personally think you're more interesting. So
I don't know about that. I think everybody wants to know you played professional baseball.
I did.
What position?
I was a pitcher.
Okay.
I was a pitcher.
What's your best pitch?
I would say my breaking ball, curveball, which I didn't actually learn until like 3 to 4 years before I was done playing. So save the best for last, I guess. But
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. A little about me. I a little different upbringing, you know, born and raised in the Midwest, love Midwest. Out of school, my degree's in economics, but got involved in an orthopedic sports startup. And so spent really my 20s traveling around and working with orthopedic surgeons, athletic trainers in the sports med world. It was awesome. Loved it. Got to travel the world doing manufacturing, and we met some incredible people, and we did some cool things, but came a point for me where I was ready to transition out. You know, I was that dorky kid in high school that would build the Excel model and show like you build one single family and then you could do 2 and then you could get 4 and then you could get 8. And finally decided that I should probably test my Excel spreadsheets in the world. And so got out of that business about 3 years ago and jumped into real estate. Got involved in a couple development projects. Really came out of the gate hot. We were working on a 22-story high-rise building, and to be totally honest, kind of got kicked in the teeth on it. Rates went up 550 basis points, and that was not in the underwrite, and banks got more conservative, and it just kind of died on the vine. And so that was a tough entry into the business, but because of that, I've really transitioned into focusing on more workforce and affordable housing, multifamily. Now run a private equity fund where we just go out and we acquire Midwest, predominantly in Nebraska, where we're based here, multifamily deals. And it's been good. Been really grateful for that opportunity and working with some really talented people, you included in that process. And there's been a big learning curve, but it's been really good, and blessed to be surrounded by great people. So excited to get into some of the deals that we've done in that business, both from what you've seen and what I've seen, and hopefully be able to provide some value today as we talk through it.
No doubt. We'll branch into some of that as we go here.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So just kind of jumping into it. Obviously, one of the things I mentioned was rates have gone up 500 basis points from where they were 3 years ago. So we talk about creative finance and the benefit creative finance can bring from an investor standpoint. From your perspective, can you just kind of lay out what is creatively financing deals? What does that mean?
I would say creatively financing a deal is thinking outside the box, and a lot of times we like to confine our ability to transact real estate to this box of, well, I need to put 20 to 25% down, and I need to go to a bank, and I need to get a 75 to 80% note, and that's how I'm going to buy this piece of real estate. Creatively financing is just working outside of those parameters with seller participation, whether that be in the form of a small carryback, in the form of a promissory note that may or may not be tied to the property, or you can utilize a full seller finance vehicle where the seller may be able to carry 80, 90, even 100% of the property value, and you're fully leveraged through the seller, and you're not having to deal with any banks, and you're not having any restrictions or any DSCR requirements, and you can really capitalize on the opportunity a lot more. And oftentimes it meets the needs of the seller in a better fashion than if you were to just go to the bank. Sometimes it can save on tax advantages for them specifically, or if it's something where it's a state concern and they're not sure what they're going to do with their kids, you can give them a 5, 7, 10-year time frame to lock in a price and say, hey, we're flexible. We can structure this to be 3 years and we're going to have to balloon this out and take care of you and your family, or we can carry this 10 years and have kind of a flexible future. So really thinking outside of the box of just a standard transaction of, I need to save up X amount of money, take it to the bank, pay it to them, and then they're going to help me buy this piece of property. It's way more fluid, and it can bring in a lot of factors, both economically and just motivationally from a seller perspective.
That's interesting. I love what you bring up talking about the seller's perspective, because I think a lot of times on the buy side, we get super excited about creative deals, and it feels kind of buyer centric, where it's, we're doing these deals, we don't have financing, or we don't have this, we don't have that. But in reality, what I've learned working with you and seeing other deals is a lot of times it's a better deal for the seller too. Like sometimes the seller isn't wanting to just walk away from that piece of property they've been working on forever. They want to keep some sort of residual benefit, but they don't really know how to do it. And so understanding different ways to be able to creatively finance deals and understanding how to communicate that to the seller to see how it actually can benefit them is honestly pretty interesting.
It is.
So I guess with that, I think it might be helpful if we jump into some examples of seller finance deals. So I know, we kind of were meeting pre-meeting here, and we wrote down a couple of them. So, I think the first one I'd like to get into is just straight seller finance. Like when you say we did a seller finance deal, like, can you define that for us? And then let's maybe get into an example.
Yeah. So seller finance, different parties within real estate define this differently. So I want to be very clear. When I say seller finance, I'm talking about the seller completely carrying the note on a piece of real estate. They're in first lien position. They have a deed of trust on the property. They're collateralized directly by the asset that you're buying. And that's, I understand some of those words to new people in real estate may still be complex. Essentially, I am only dealing with the seller. There's no bank involvement. It's me and the seller. That's the relationship. I am leveraging my dollars through the seller. They're the bank. That's how you can think about this.
Okay. Yep.
A specific example of that would be 12 units that we just bought in Syracuse, Nebraska. We placed traditional financing on 4 of the units, a little 4-plex. And then we did complete seller financing through the 8-plex, next neighboring properties. But the way that we went about that was the seller wanted a certain price. That price for these 12 units was $900,000.
Yep.
We got traditional financing on the 4-plex and priced it out at a lower price tag so that we could increase our leverage. And for the 8-plex, we got a full seller carry. I just twisted my words.
It's confusing, right? Like
full
all these
seller
different
finance
things.
at $600,000.
Yeah.
Directly from them that we were able to leverage the entire property through. So we actually came to the project with only about 10% down on $900,000 purchase, which was really, really beneficial for us.
Yeah.
The other reason that was advantageous was if I were to go to a bank with that specific asset, they would have told me to run for the hills just because it's exactly what we target. The rents were low. The operating expenses were high. There was a lot of upside for somebody that knows how to come in and operate the deal. But day one going into it didn't look very good. I think it's only bringing in $6,500 a month in rent, which for those of us in real estate, a lot of times we gauge the 1% rule to see if an investment is close.
Yeah.
So we would like to see that number to be closer to $9,000 in rent. And we got the ability through a seller finance with favorable debt terms. I think we placed this at 30-year amortization with 4%, and it's 5 years of interest only. So we freed up a lot of front-end cash flow to be able to make this make sense, get the seller their price, and understand that, okay, we really do have an opportunity to force appreciate this thing to a point where in 5 years, it's absolutely going to be worth $900,000, and we have zero concerns with it. And that's a lot of the game that real estate professionals play. Is you have to be a little bit of a blind optimist, but you also have to understand what the operator takes to get it there, and be able to execute on those numbers. As you and I have talked about 100 times, it's anybody can make a spreadsheet look as sexy as they want.
Yeah.
But to be actually able to identify the real road of execution that it takes to get there, that you have to be confident in that to be able to go in and say, okay, I'm paying $900,000 for a property that's really only worth $600 today.
Yeah.
But I'm going to creatively structure the deal so that I can execute my business plan and really, harvest the fruits of my labor.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's so much to unpack in that. I think it's, I want you to talk on this a little bit, is this concept of, I'll call it pro forma buying, right? Anytime we go and we buy an asset, we're developing these pro formas up front, which you and I have talked about. Like the pro forma is pretty much useless without implementing the actual asset management plan. But like, how do you think through, a bank may not be interested in that, right? Like if you're at a 600 or 6,000, and you use your net operating income and you put a cap rate on it, it's like, well, you're overpaying by, $300,000, right? Like maybe how the bank looks at it. But one, the way you structure this deal, you've got creative terms in place. So the project's still cash flowing. You said 5-year IO on that, which is wild. In case anybody doesn't understand, like what he just laid out is unbelievable. And so the because of the way you structure the deal, like it cash flows today, and then it's an implementation of the asset management plan. So how do you look at pro forma buying versus like going in cap rate buying, and how do you ensure that the asset management plan is actually executed and you're not left buying, like overpaying for a property that you can't actually get it to perform at?
There's a lot of levers of control, I guess, that you can pull along the way. So let's call the traditional route, you're going to a bank and you're financing this thing directly, 25% down, I'm getting a 75% LTV note, and I'm paying P&I right away. Generally speaking.
Which P&I is?
Principal and interest.
Okay, great.
Sorry, yes. Principal and interest, taxes, insurance, all of your normal operating expenses. If I'm going to go in and buy this property directly from a bank, I need that property with debt where it currently sits today at 7.5% to 8%. If I'm going to cash flow that property day one, I need a positive spread on the cap rate to the debt. So if I'm putting 25% down and I've got 8% debt, I need to buy that thing at probably a 9 cap for it to really make sense on numbers. And when I say cap, I'm talking about capitalization rate, which is your net operating income divided by asset value. So I would need to buy this specific property for closer to $600,000. But I look at the situation and I say, okay, I can't control this because the seller wants $900,000. So I have zero chance of transacting with this specific approach. I need to pull a lever of control on my end. So get to the price, I need to affect debt specifically, and I need to affect probably that principal and interest number. So let me increase purchase price so that I can drop the cap rate. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, I need to free up some cash flow. So I need to pull off that principal payment, and I need to free up a little bit of control from the perspective of I need this rate to lower a lot. I can't be paying 7.9% or 8% or 8.5% when I'm paying this high number. I need to drop it down. So those are kind of some of the levers you can pull. Again, we talked about if a seller has varying interests. This specific seller was focused on about a 5-year period. So we negotiated, okay, I've got interest only to pull. Let's go 5 years interest only. Let's get you to this price. And let's get the debt at, I think the note was 4%. So we cut it from 8 to 4. And that's where the numbers played out for it to cash flow. And that's the beautiful part about creative is you see the needs that need to be met. And you have, a master board, if you will, of levers to pull, and you just kind of piece together a puzzle that gets to where the seller needs to be, but still meets the needs of buying it on pro forma, which I completely ignored that aspect of your question. But
well, hey, we got time. Like, I like lean into that. So like we build the pro forma out. And I guess I also want to just talk real quick too. When we're recording this right now, interest rates, I mean, we just got a deal term back on a project, and the rate was, what was it at? On the portfolio buy. We just got the term sheet on.
7.9.
7.9. And we're like pretty thrilled about that.
Yeah.
Right now. Like that's the interest rate environment that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
But this deal you're talking about that we just did, the rate's 4%.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's wild.
Yeah.
And I don't think people, back in 2019, before that, when rates were down at 3-4%, when you go to get a loan from the bank, it basically is always LTV constrained, right? 75, 80%, maybe 85%. People didn't even know what a DSCR was. They're like, what's a debt service coverage ratio? That doesn't even make sense. Like when you're underwriting at these deals, but what people are realizing is when you're underwriting at like 7.9, 8, 8.5, well, now your LTV is almost irrelevant. Like nobody's getting 80% loan at those rates. Like you are now looking at debt service coverage ratios, which are oftentimes like a minimum of 1-2, right? But being able to creatively structure the deal and get to a 4% rate, specifically for the 5-year IO, all of a sudden your DSCR looks like
skyrockets
pre-2020, right?
Yeah.
And so without the ability to creatively finance, like there's nowhere on planet Earth right now at the date of this recording when you're going to be getting that type of rate.
Yep. There's a lot less hoops to jump through as well. I mean, going and presenting this to the seller, obviously you want to see, as a seller, you want to see a positive track record. They want to know, okay, what do you own? What have you actually done?
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to walk into a deal like this without a really solid business plan that you can just show them and say, this is what I'm planning on doing. They want to know that, you're a credible borrower. But with that being said, there's a lot of people in our industry that are really successful with this. Pace Morby, probably the poster child for creative finance.
Yeah.
He preaches no credit check. No, there's all these hoops that you're not having to, no credit pull, no cash out of my pocket, this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it's impossible to do, but it's very possible in order to meet the needs that a seller is presenting. Hey, your property's worth 600. Well, I want 900 out of it. Okay. Give me these terms.
Yeah.
And we can execute on that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, especially now with cap rates decompressing, asset values going down, people still want those 2020, 2021 numbers. And the best way to get it, and the people that know how to creatively structure deals are having a lot of success getting that number and just pulling the levers of creative finance to achieve it.
Yep.
And so it's an extremely, while it's not super simple to understand or even simple to execute, the path to get there, I guess, is pretty simple.
Yeah.
You don't have to get a credit check from a bank. You don't have to submit a pro forma to a bank. You don't have to go through and, have your loan officer sit in front of loan committee and get grilled.
Yeah.
It's more of a, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. This is, do you trust me to fulfill this business plan? Yes. Let's do the deal.
Yeah.
And it's really that simple. And at that point, you're just going to the title company and transacting the deal.
Yeah. I love that. So I still have so many questions on this, but one of the things, just to like high level, circle back on this. So it was a $900,000, the assets valued $900,000. And how much cash brought to the deal?
We got a $150,000 note from the bank on a $200,000 asset. That was a standard 75% loan.
Yep.
So we brought $150,000 to a $900,000 purchase.
Okay. I mean,
so I guess over 10%. It was closer to 15, but still less than you would bring to a traditional bank transaction.
Significantly less. Significantly less. How do people find a deal like that?
A lot of times, this is a perfect example of tell everybody what you're doing. If you're buying real estate, tell everybody you're buying real estate. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to go buy these deals. This is a perfect example of it. My friend who I work out with, he happens to own a gym. He through simple conversation, this prospect came about, and he sent me it. and said, hey, do you think this is a deal? They want X out of it. And I told him very frankly, no, that I can't transact this from a bank, but are they willing to sell or finance it?
Yeah.
3 conversations later, we're walking the property. There's some rapport building happening. What assets do you own? Well, I own this building where, there's actually a real feel to it. And, over the course of time, you build a relationship, and through the course of building that relationship, there's trust built, there's track record built. And by the time that you're ready to transact the deal, it's extremely comfortable from both ends. So I would say specific to this one, pure relationship. Tell people what you're doing, network, go to these real estate meetups. When you're in a coffee shop, and you're talking about things, and somebody comes up and asks you what you do, tell them, well, I work in real estate and this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm buying. That you never know what kind of opportunity is going to present itself just by simple conversation. We've done a few more of these that have been more exclusive to cold outreach, writing letters or making phone calls by pulling lists. That's a lot of the standard real estate path, is having to do a lot of cold outreach. But some of the best deals are just fall in your lap, just like this one did. I mean, it's just by telling people what you're doing and being observant and letting people know that you want to be successsive in what you're trying to do and not being ashamed of it.
Yeah, just planting the seeds, and it's amazing. Yeah, it is interesting. Like, you just you're always planting, and I've observed this in you just through our partnership of just like, you're always having conversations, you're always planting. And then, we were talking about this morning, like in our business, the cash flow is not always super consistent, but from all the activity you're doing up front, like, you'll just have these huge hits and these huge months. And that's definitely, something that I continue to learn. And what I appreciate about you is just always talking about it, always networking, always having the conversations. And I think the other thing too that I want to just hit on real quick with this, and want to reinforce before we jump over to kind of the next creative structure, is the seller finance deal from the seller perspective. So this individual financed a big chunk of this deal, and we're still paying him every month. He's just still making money on it. The other scenario was he exited, sold the whole thing, had some sort of major tax event happen, and he's got to redeploy that cap, maybe on a 1031 or something. He's got to redeploy it all, right? So that's, again, it helps me in these conversations with these sellers to remember it's not just us winning. It's them winning.
Correct.
And we have great relationships with some banks. We do lots of deals with banks. Like, there's a time and a place for it. But I mean, I think in a lot of deals, like, if you can find a way just to keep it between buyer and seller and not get a third party involved with the bank, like, you oftentimes can find a really good recipe for everybody to win.
Absolutely. This specific example, they really didn't have a crazy desire to sell unless they got to the number that made sense for them.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't, if we were going to offer 850,000, they wouldn't have taken the deal. 900 was the number that they knew that they needed in order to meet the needs of, whatever they were going to do.
Yeah.
Now, again, going back to the example specifically, they had not quite figured out what they were going to do as it trickled down through their estate, and they didn't have really a tax plan yet. So it would have just been a slap in the face. Here's your capital gain hit.
Yeah.
Take to the bank.
Yep.
This 5-year buffer, really the intent behind that 5-year window was, we're supplying about 75% of the cash flow that you're used to from this note that we have. And, oh, by the way, you get 5 years to figure out what you're going to do with this $600,000 when it balloons. So how you're going to structure it through your estate, whether when it gets called, you can roll it into something, 1031 or what. It's debt, so we're not going to be able to 1031 that. But it's, there's multiple tax strategies that take some planning that now they're able to kind of discuss, figure out with their professionals, their, financial advisor, their CPA, their attorneys, that they can actually sit down, figure out a plan, say, hey, I've got this asset now. I don't have to operate it daily. It's debt. It's a debt asset. Let's figure out what to do with it. That opens up a lot of freedom, especially when they're continuing to get cash flow. They can actually make a plan. And they don't have to worry about changing a toilet at 2 a.m. A pipe burst or something like that. There's a lot of freedom in it to a lot of, especially aging investors. This specific group was a couple of 75-year-old men that They've been doing it for 40 years.
Yeah.
So they were ready to get out, and it was perfect timing. And we created an avenue for them to be able to execute that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to me. And one of the things I think is becoming very apparent in specifically our market in the Midwest is how much in these like secondary or tertiary cities is still mom and pop operators.
Mm-hmm.
And I say the word mom and pop like affectionately, like these people have put their heart and soul into these properties for years sometimes. But they are, I mean, I think there's this growing trend right now on like the M&A standpoint where a lot of boomers have built businesses and people are trying to go out and acquire the businesses and consolidate and bring them together.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that same opportunity presents itself on the multifamily arm too. Like a lot of the boomer generation has a lot of this multifamily.
Mm-hmm.
They may own 1 or 2 addresses and they've been working it for a long time. And we can come in with an asset management plan, which at some point we'll do a whole podcast just on asset management because we recognize like the acquisition's great, but if you don't implement the plan, it kind of is all irrelevant, right?
100%.
But I'm seeing a huge opportunity for us to be able to go out and be able to, buy up from a lot of these mom and pop operators and bring a level of sophistication and approach and look at our pro formas and say, maybe buying this at a 5 or 5.5 cap, which just on paper may look like we're quote unquote overpaying. But then you look at it and you're like, we can get a 30% uptick in NOI within 12 months, some cases in like 4 months is how underperforming these assets are.
Yep.
And so, there's so much that in real estate, we'll get into all this, talk about this as we create more content and more podcasts. But they're just, you use the phrase of the levers. Like, I love that. Like, I think it's just super helpful to people to understand, like, any situation, there's like a lever you can pull to figure it out.
Yep.
And it's just about getting into the game and experiencing like, okay, all right, this is a problem. That problem oftentimes is a lever you can pull. And now you got to educate and train yourself on how to do that.
Yep. I think that's a very valid point. The best business owners are the most efficient and creative problem solvers.
That's great. Yeah.
The higher you move up, it's just how big of a problem can you solve?
Yeah.
If I want to be a wholesaler, which most real estate people understand what wholesaling is, you're essentially buying something for under what an end buyer would pay for it, and you're capturing the arbitrage. I'm buying a house for $50,000. I'm selling it for $55,000. I make $5,000.
Yeah.
If you want to be specifically a wholesaler and you want to stay in wholesale forever, it's very well defined. You have a super defined buy box that you go out and it's scalable and you can do it. And I know a lot of people that make a lot of money just wholesaling properties.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to buy and hold, you have a different sandbox that you play in.
Yeah.
If you want to syndicate deals, you have a different sandbox that you play in. But being able to look at all the different acquisition structures, pull levers to figure out how each opportunity gets maximized, I think that's one of the strengths that sophisticated real estate professionals develop over time is they look at specific opportunities and they say, this one fits in this sandbox.
Yeah.
Even though I'm playing in this sandbox, let's put it in this one and make it work.
Yeah.
Type of an approach. So there's infinite levers to pull, and you just, you need to be creative even in your thought process and figuring out which sandbox am I going to play in with a specific opportunity.
Yeah. I love that. And honestly, I mean, that's something that you're just great at. You're so good at that. It's creatively problem solving and thinking. And then I'm always learning something from you. We run into these problems and Sam's like, well, have you thought about doing this? I'm like, no, I didn't. That's a great idea though. Like, I'm glad we talked about this. Like, let's do it. So, and I think that's the power of just partnership too, right? Like you just try to surround yourself with people. And I think we both know people that have kind of just done it themselves, and you can build, a small but pretty profitable business doing that. But I think speaking for myself, like I really enjoy doing it with people that I enjoy and I can learn from. And every day, like we're pushing each other, because not every day is you wake up just with like the energy to go kill it. Some days you're just like a little bit tired. And, the kids were up last night and you're just like, oh man. If I get a text from Sam, he's like, hey, we got this under contract. Be like, oh yeah, let's go. So, when you can find those people, it's just like, how do you continue to surround yourself with them and grow? So I appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate who you are as a person and what you're teaching me every day. So I'm excited to keep digging into this though. So the next thing we want to talk about is lease options.
This is your court because this is even something new to me. So,
Dude, I love a good lease option. Love a good lease option. So, we've done a couple of these deals in our equity fund.
yep.
And I've actually done it on a personal residence as well, and we're looking to do it on another residence. So like, just like high level, I guess, lease option is 2 contracts, a lease and an option. And the option is basically an agreed upon strike price at a future date that you agreed upon to be able to purchase the property.
Mm-hmm.
Up until that strike price is executed, you have a lease agreement. And the way we've structured them is essentially like almost like a triple net commercial. Like in a commercial world, you would have a triple net deal where all the expenses are on the leaseholder or the leasee, I guess, and then the owner is still responsible for taxes, but everything else is just like passed through. And so we've done this now on 2 decent sized single family portfolios. So in our fund, on our approach, like just buying one single family property isn't enough scale for us right now. But if we could buy a 30 unit portfolio, now all of a sudden it's like, okay, yeah, we'll take a look at it. And so what we have identified is actually these lease options allow us to get into deals for essentially no cash. You have to sometimes pay an option fee to the owner. And let's say that's $5 or $10,000, but even that, like that's negotiable, right? To like hold the option agreement. And then we enter in. So like a tangible example is we just did this on 32 unit portfolio. And we went to the seller and he's been building this portfolio for the last 5 years. He's done a great job. He's been aggressive. He's made some great buys, but a lot of his debt that he had on it is ballooning in the next 12 months, 24 months. And right now his debt basis is like 3.5 and it's going to go up to 7.5. And you change that number on your pro forma. You're like, oh, that doesn't cash flow very well, you know?
Yeah.
And so what we're able to do is find people in those situations and be able to step in and say, all right, we think going back to our asset management plan, there's actually like quite a bit of bump that we can get in the net operating incomes by being vertically integrated with the operator and controlling all of our expenses and driving up rents, that we can weather that increase in interest rates. But we don't want to go in and buy all this property right now. So we implement a lease option. So we are going to able to go in and for all intents and purposes, own the property and how we behave with the property. We control all the lease agreements. We control the expenses. We control the CapEx into the property. And the seller, basically, we just pay them a monthly payment. So it stabilizes their cash flow. They don't have to worry about the increase in rents coming up in the next 24 months. We don't have to come out with, let's say they didn't want to do a creative deal. We had to do a traditional bank deal. We have to go and come up with 25, 30% down on the deal. We don't have to do that now. So we agreed to a strike price. This particular deal, we were able to agree to a purchase price of the current present value of the assets, but the strike price on the asset of the portfolio is actually in 36 months. So it's a 3-year option agreement. And so what our plan is we're going to go, we've already started this. We've started increasing our rental raises. So at year 3, we should be able to go to a bank and get a loan for 70% of the value of the assets at year 3 and basically be no out of pocket because that 30% equity piece that we would put in would be what we've invested and raised in net operating incomes over the last 36 months.
Yep. Something I want to touch on real quick is that I love about lease option, and it speaks directly to what you're talking about. But if we are in an environment where it's specific to single family, if we're in an environment where in 3 years we still have 8% debt, you guys have force appreciated these and also ridden the market appreciation of the assets to a point where the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to have an uptick in market appreciation. And with these specific assets, you guys are going to put some money into them. They're going to look better. And we're still in a single family housing market that's relatively constricted and demand is extremely high.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just want to, I guess, touch on that specific to this deal, you guys are in a safe investment because you locked in market rate today.
Yes.
You're going to put money into them.
Yep.
And they're going to be nicer. It's almost like a bifurcation of a 36 unit multifamily and a single family flip.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you're taking the best of both worlds there, and you have multiple exit strategies. And that's just, again, one of the benefits to this creative deal that I'm not familiar with to speak on it extremely successfully, but I think it's amazing what you guys structured with that.
The thing that you got to be careful with single family, we use the phrase forced appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
And just for people that don't know what that is, is that like a real term, by the way? Or we just make that up?
Forced appreciation?
Yeah.
It's a very commonly used term within real estate.
Okay. I mean, we always use it all the time. I don't know if you could Google it or not, but basically a multifamily property is valued based off of its net operating income, right? Just like a business would be. So when we go buy multifamily deals and we talk about our pro formas, which is our analysis before we get into the deal, and then we talk about our asset management plan, which is the implementation to get net operating income from A to B.
Mm-hmm.
And we do all of that because at the end of the day, the value of the property is your net operating income divided by your cap rate. So the higher you can raise your net operating income, the higher the value of your property is.
Mm-hmm.
Local market has some relevance in the value of that, right? It probably influences the cap rates more than it does like the value of the properties. I say all that because when we go and buy single family portfolios, you just have to be careful because regardless of the net operating income of the portfolio, oftentimes the bank will still value the properties based off of the market.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing on these lease options that we're really careful of is communicating to the banks up front to say, hey, this is what our plan is. This is how long we think it's going to take. We're going to be coming to you for takeouts and showing them our path and our plan. So we don't come to the bank in 36 months and them just being like, what's going on here right now? Like, oh, we're going to value these properties at your strike price. It's like, well, no, our strike price was what they were worth 36 months ago.
Yeah.
We just negotiated that deal. So that's one thing that you just got to kind of be aware of. And I think if the plan is to go to a bank for the takeout, getting the bank involved earlier in the conversation, they don't need to do anything other than just be like looped in and be like, yeah, okay, like we get it. We understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, we're on board with this.
Yeah.
And that's kind of on any of these deals that we go after, I mean, I don't think we've ever done a deal where the plan was ever to just like buy it and don't touch it for the next 10 years. There's always some sort of exit, whether it's through a refinance, whether we go agency, whether it's, we're going to reposition and sell it, and understanding what those exits are and making sure you're communicating ahead of time with those people so that they're like ready for the intake.
Yeah.
I find this like pretty helpful. So anyway, that's kind of high level lease option, but you can lease option. What I'll add to that, we've done it with portfolio deals just because we need a bit more scale, but you could lease option just one property too.
Yeah. Could be a single family house or a duplex or threeplex. It's a great way to house hack, to be honest.
Yeah.
If you jump into a unit, I mean, that's a very common term that a lot of people just getting into real estate, that's a very familiar avenue to get into real estate is house hacking, jumping in, living in one of the units, fixing up the other two, driving up net operating income, and then, structuring something where you balloon out in 3 years and either sell it for a lot of money by ballooning it, or you can refinance it and be in it for nothing. And then you're just kind of chilling, sitting on some cash flow. Yeah. So it's a very productive avenue and a very big lever to pull. It's a big
another lever.
If you know how to do it, it's a big one.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so we've talked seller finance, we've talked lease options, seller carry.
Yeah.
We talk about seller carry. Lay it out, define it.
Yep.
What is it?
So seller carry, again, this is specific to personal terminology. I'm sure somebody else has a different way of explaining this structure. Seller carry to me and in the circle that I run in is a small holdback, generally between 5 to 20% of the purchase price. And a lot of times it functions as a supplement to your down payment. So when using a seller carry, you're obviously not going to finance a property completely with only getting 10% of the purchase price leveraged. That means that I need to bring 90% to the table in order to carry that little 10%. So when I say it supplements as a down payment, we generally go to the seller and we say, hey, let's use round numbers. I've got $1 million property. To make this make sense, because debt's so high, I need you to carry back about 100 to 150,000 at 5% to bring my blended debt rate down a little bit. And I'm going to use that to either plug into the property, use it as an improvement line of credit to where, you know, if you function through a bank and you put the 25% down, then you're getting this $100,000 to work with. You know, there's multiple ways to use that. A lot of banks have an issue, especially now, with second positions on lien deed of trust situation.
What's a second position?
Second position is essentially if I default on my loan and on this $1 million property, the bank has $800,000 vested. The bank gets the first $800,000.
So their first position.
Their first position.
Okay.
And then let's say this property sells for $1 million and there's a second position on it. Then that next person in line, let's call this seller A, that individual gets the next $100,000. So there's a sequencing of who gets paid when.
Yep.
I brain farted right there. But one of the creative ways that we use seller carries is we essentially use it as an unsecured line of credit. And we're able to do that primarily because of track record. When you have a PFS that says you're worth X amount and you have X amount of assets that you can show an individual and say, hey, this is my collateral. You know, I don't want you to specifically put a lien on this property because it restricts me to what I can actually do in implementing an asset management plan, which you and I have both discussed is the most important part to buying any of this. You know, the acquisition's great, but I need to structure a management plan to be able to, you know, force appreciate this thing. There's the term again. So something that we've done is we've been able to negotiate these to be essentially an unsecured line of credit that's directly collateralized to our portfolio and say, again, back to our example, you're going to, you know, $1 million asset, you're giving me $100,000. I'm just going to use that $100,000 and use it as my down payment to the bank. So if they're going to give me an 80% loan, I'm getting a 10% carry. Now I only need to bring 100,000 to the table.
Got it.
So instead of having to bring 200, I'm just extending leverage a little bit and using, again, you need to blend the debt rate down because it all comes back to how it cash flows. You can't buy, back to our first example, I wouldn't have been able to make this work spending $900,000 on a $600,000 asset and trying to extend leverage on a carry because then I'm just losing money every month. It doesn't work. So it only works specific to a competitive buy at the pricing that you're at, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. So just to try to like lay out seller finance, seller carry. So seller finance is, we use the term like in first position. So the first position being somebody's giving you money and they have a lien against the property. So if you default, the first position is basically coming in and getting their loan paid off. Their deed of trust or their mortgage, depending on your state.
They essentially function completely as a bank. Let's say I miss 3 payments in a row, 3 months in a row on my seller finance position. That individual has every right to just foreclose on me. And then they get the asset back. And that's honestly another way that we sell it is, you know, hey, I'm putting worst case scenario here. I'm putting $200,000 in your pocket. You think this thing's worth 900, and if I default, you get it back for 600. So it's a win-win-win-win-win for you.
That's true. So that's seller finance. Now with seller carry, functionally the seller is still helping finance part of the capital stack.
Correct.
It's just rather than filing a lien against the property, you use the term unsecured. So there's no lien against it.
Correct.
On the property, and they're giving you back some capital. And outside of that, there's a specific promissory note that lay out the terms of the repayment.
Correct. We use promissory note and personal guarantee, which are both, you know, we go back and forth. When we negotiate these, generally our first negotiated, terminology is, hey, our attorneys drew this up. Please run this by your attorneys and make sure they're comfortable with this, because $100,000 is not a small amount of money.
Right.
So make sure we're comfortable with this. Again, the premise is the same. This is essentially unsecured. We want you to know it's unsecured.
Yeah.
And we want it to be unsecured because it gives us flexibility.
Yeah.
But we're signing personal guarantees and a promissory where you have direct collateral to everything that we own, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it expands the collateral to more than just a single asset, which sometimes can be beneficial.
And the reason why oftentimes as the seller carry, we don't want the seller to file a lien in second position, because the primary debt holder, the bank in this case, doesn't want a second position on
Correct.
that. So we need to be able to secure the primary debt, which makes up 70 or 80% of the leverage, and then we're bringing in this unsecured note.
Yep.
Again, though, like I think it's important to note that that's great. Like trying to get all this leverage and pulling it in, but you got to work it all into your initial pro forma, obviously.
It has to work. I mean, leverage is dangerous. I mean, it's something all real estate people use, and real estate people love talking about how debt is this magic vehicle that will take you to paradise.
Yeah.
Debt is horrifying if you use it in the wrong way.
Yeah.
If I have $5 million worth of assets and I have $10 million in debt, I'm in a really, really bad place. That's not a fun place to be in.
Yeah.
So using it appropriately, and that's, really understanding an asset management plan and really knowing what you can do with a property is extremely important prior to jumping into some of these creative structures where you do extend leverage and you do kind of push the envelope a little bit outside of the normal sandbox, which is very controlled.
Yeah.
And the bank won't really let you make a horrible decision because, then they're on the hook too.
Right.
Whereas some of these creative deals,
right.
You're pushing the envelope a little bit outside. So you need to be really darn sure that you can execute and have a 99.999% confidence level that this is going to go through the way that I have said it's going to go through.
That's a great point, because the bank, they have their loan committees. I mean, they're not going to give you a loan that they don't feel confident.
Correct.
You could go out and negotiate a seller finance deal where the seller's like, okay, great, let's do it.
Yeah.
And you could be upside down $1,000 every month.
Yep.
Just because you didn't do your math up front. You didn't underwrite it the right way.
Correct.
And that's on you at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
So
there is an education that goes into it that I don't think that I would encourage doing a aggressive seller finance deal as your first deal in real estate, because pushing the envelope on that is, it's a little nerve wracking. I mean, finding a great deal and then implementing the best strategy, I don't think you can lose. But one of the situations, our first example we gave with the, we're overpaying $300,000. If I wasn't absolutely certain that those assets were going to be worth that in 5 years, that's not a good deal. I screwed everybody. That's a part of that deal.
Yeah.
So I need to be very, very careful about, what levers I'm pulling. And they're fun. They're fun to pull, but you also need to pull them at the right time.
Yeah. Because when you understand them, I mean, you say, overpaid by $300,000. And I think that's a way to be able to get into these deals, though. Working with these mom and pop sellers that look at that and say, oh, that's a great exit. And it is a great exit for them. But again, before we buy any of these assets, we are underwriting them very thoroughly. We're putting together a very thorough pro forma, and we're analyzing the individual markets. And that all then trickles into our asset management plan, to which we are then implementing to get our net operating incomes to where they need to be. We, sometimes there are deals that you're like, okay, we could get them to seller finance if seller finance that, but the value is not there. We can't force appreciate these assets to where they need to get to be able to make it a deal, right?
Yep.
And so, that's something as well that I think is hard for people who are like really just starting, where it's like they just want to do a deal, like any deal. And I think there's a lot of different ways to creatively structure deals, but every now and then you have to just say, this just isn't.
It's just not a deal.
It's not going to work.
Yep.
Like, it's just not going to work.
There is a level in which a deal is not a deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
And you're going to be a lot more grateful in 5 years that
you didn't do
that deal.
Generally the best deals that real estate professionals do are the deals they failed to execute on, or were not good deals.
Yeah, that's
because
a great point.
It saves you a lot of heartache and trouble. And
Yeah, I mean, it can be, you get into a bad deal and that thing's bleeding cash and you're going to be losing sleep over that
Yep.
for a long time. So,
Yep.
okay, so we've talked seller finance, talked lease options, seller carries. The last one I'm going to talk about is, I want to call them subject twos. And I know you brought up Pace Morby, obviously. Like, there's a ton of content out there with his whole community and world.
Yep.
I wanted to bring this up and talk about a deal that I just did that was subject to, and I want to like very explicitly lay out how all the different components work together and just give an example. Because I think that the kind of the sub two world is always evolving and changing. And as rates are at where they're at and people are starting to sell properties, I think it's becoming more and more popular.
Yeah.
But if I'm a bank and I'm looking at my balance sheet and I'm seeing a bunch of these loans that are 30-year fixed mortgages at 3.5%, I might start calling on some of these, being like, "Hey, do you still own this property? Like, are you?" Because I know like the sentiment now is like nobody ever actually checks these.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh, don't worry about it. Like literally nobody. And to this point, they really haven't. But at some point in time, I think once rates like stabilize, I do think banks are going to start looking at some of these loans and starting to check to see like who's on them still.
Yeah.
And just, it's pretty simple, right? You just go to the assessor site. And if title was transferred, be like, well, clearly this is not the person that owns this home anymore. Like that doesn't make any sense. So,
Yep.
so I just want to like quick touch on, we just bought a property and we did a subject to, the debt was in place. The debt was 2 3/4, like unreal, right?
Yep.
30-year fixed.
Never again.
No, never again.
Never
Like never. And so we're looking at this and it's just like, oh my gosh, like I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose this deal. So the first thing that we did was the seller at the beginning wasn't really open to any seller financing, just wanted to be simple, wanted to get out. But, you look at that and you're just like, man, there's got to be a way to get this done. So we actually negotiated a longer close period with the intention of trying to establish a rapport and relationship with the seller.
Yeah.
I mean, you brought this up a couple times. Oftentimes, like your ability to execute seller finance deals is your ability to like show your track record and have them trust, like, what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You've done deals before. You've got a good sized portfolio. Like we're real, right? Not to say if you don't have a portfolio, you can't do deals. It helps. And once you have it, you can leverage that. So
Yep.
first thing we did was negotiate a longer close period to be able and intentionally like invest in that relationship. Like could do coffee, do lunch, just kind of like chat and get to know each other. And finally we got to a place where about a month before close and I just sat down with the guard, man, like, look, here's the deal. Love the property, want the property, we're going to buy it. And we're going to buy it through the way we had agreed to buy it at the beginning. So, but look, it would be huge if we could find a way to keep this debt in place. And the way I described it was, there are 3 people in this transaction. There's you, there's me, and there's the bank. And you're going to win either way. So it's really a matter of like, are you going to work with me to help me win more? Or am I going to be the loser and let the bank win? And like putting it through that perspective, the seller was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I like you, you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because we'd invest in the relationship. I was like, all right, if you can figure out a way to do it, like I'm game, we'll do it. So I started kind of thinking through and processing, all the different possible ways like you could keep the debt in place. Because I think it's important to note on 30-year fixed mortgages that aren't like VA loans, like they're not technically assumable. Like you can't call the bank and be like, hey, transfer them to my name.
Yeah.
Now, also important note, like there's no law against this. This is just like banks and their underwriting mortgage docs. Like they just don't want you to transfer these things.
Yes.
Right. And so we kind of began this journey of figuring out like, what is the most optimal way to be able to do this? And, obviously like the easiest, the lowest hanging fruit would just be like, just basically screw it. Like it's just transfer title, keep the debt in place, just keep the debt in place. Don't tell the bank. We'll just keep rolling and basically roll the dice that the bank's not going to go and check the county assessor sites and see if anybody's if title ever transferred. Cause that's like the triggering event, right? Is like, has title ever transferred?
Yeah.
And so didn't love that. Like it just felt like we were just a little bit too exposed. And so what we ended up doing was working with the seller and working with my attorney, we set up a trust. And we made the trust the name of the property. And in a trust, there's three different parties. You have the beneficiary, the grantor, and the trustee. Okay, so the beneficiary is not publicly disclosed anywhere. It's not a publicly disclosed figure. Like that's kind of the point of the trust, is the anonymity of it.
Yeah.
The grantor and the trustee they're on the trust documents. And so what we did was we set it up where the trustee is my attorney. The grantor is the current property owner. And then the beneficiary, in this case, for insurance purposes, we actually kept the property owner on as beneficiary. So he maintains the beneficiary. And then we did a lease option agreement with myself and the property owner to then acquire the property. So title was in individual's name. We transferred title to the new trust, which if you were to look at the assessor side on this property, it would look like estate planning. Basically, it's very common to transfer property into a trust. Mm-hmm. My attorney, though, is the trustee of that trust. So by all intents and purposes, I control by proxy through my attorney the trust. And then now that the trust is held in an entity that I control through my attorney, I enter into a lease option agreement with that trust. And the lease is the payment of the monthly payment for the mortgage gets paid directly to the seller's bank account, and the seller is then paying off the mortgage through that. And the option was the equity in the deal. So in this situation, it was like 70-30 or something. And we brought 30% in as an option fee and put it in to this deal. And then the 70% is the note that still stays in place. So then, like when we talk about with a lease option, you have a lease payment and then you have an option agreement. And the option agreement is an agreed upon strike price at a certain period of time. So what we did was structure the option agreement. The value of that was the current value of the mortgage. So every month, the option strike price becomes less and less. And the termination of that date is essentially zero once the mortgage expires, at which point I will take over as beneficiary of the trust. The seller will get removed as beneficiary of the trust. He will be removed as grantor of the trust, and I will then be both beneficiary and grantor. So it was kind of
that's just an amazing. I'm mind blown every time we talk about this because you sit here and you tell me, "Oh, you're such a good creative problem solver," and then I look at that situation and I'm like, "Man, I would have never figured that out." So that was truly the breakdown on that and the steps. That's not that takes a pretty creative mind to figure that out, down to the intricacies of option price getting dwindled monthly based on where the debt's at. Like that's an extremely well structured deal that you don't really give yourself enough credit for, but it's an incredible deal.
I appreciate that. Classic stuff, man. It's again, like just back to your term, like it's a lever, right? Like it's just something you get into it. And I didn't know any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Like when you start, like you don't come in just knowing all this.
No. It does go back to a common, and I want to be careful about how I say this because I think it's a very fine line. There's absolute truth in life. We both believe in absolute truth. We both believe that there's a truth to circumstances that arise in life.
Yeah.
However, there are sometimes instances that you can appropriately and correctly challenge the norm and create wins for yourself that are purely based on the fact that you were able to step outside the box, challenge a way of thinking, and come to an alternate solution. I mean, this situation financially for you looks a lot different if you buy this piece of property and you just have to go get 8% debt at a bank.
Oh my God. I mean, yeah, way different.
I mean, it's night and day. It's an extremely large figure.
Yeah.
And that is, you didn't do anything wrong. There's nothing fishy about it. It's all above board, but it's creative and intuitive, and you have to kind of weasel your way through some uncomfortable hoops. Yeah. But you figure it out, and it's it's just extremely beneficial to test some, you have to do it this way type of transactionary or truths within an industry.
Yeah.
And being actually able to creatively come to some of these solutions that are like, I'm pretty sure I can do it this way. And you'll probably have people being like, there's no way. There's no way that's legal.
Yeah.
Like, this guy definitely did something wrong. But it's not. And vetting, having an attorney be a part of it throughout the entire process, being, completely above board. I just think it's important to recognize some of those things. And as you go through any of these creative deals, whether it be unsecured promissory notes to seller finance, direct to lease option to, I think that we brush over the importance of that. You do not want to get yourself in trouble with any of these situations in a legal scrap. Yeah. You want to make sure your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted and everything's above board.
Yep.
I'm not sitting here being a proponent of, hey, do fishy, not cool stuff. That's not what we're talking about. But finding loopholes that maintain the, above board honest. And that's something that we prioritize within our business is,
absolutely,
hey, we need to go about things the right way all the time.
Yeah.
But challenging some of the standards within how to transact. I wanted to note that.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think we probably should have like a disclaimer at the beginning of this that we are not attorneys. We're not giving legal advice. We're not attorneys. We're not doctors. Like anything we're saying is just our opinions, right? But it is based off of actual deals and transactions.
Correct. Yep.
And I 100% agree with what you're saying. Like so much of the time, we just accept things at face value.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's always been done this way. It's like, well, why? It's like, well, because it's always been done this way. It's like, okay. Like, do you have any more depth to that? I'd be like, no, I don't. It's like, okay, well, maybe there's something here that we can like figure out and work through more.
Yep.
And, certainly your career and as I'm stepping into a more like the acquisition side and starting to build a portfolio up, like it is pretty interesting and pretty powerful how quickly you can grow a portfolio of real estate if you're understanding like these different levers and how they play together.
Yeah.
And like how you can make money all throughout the value chain, but also start to build like a pretty solid net position really quick.
Yeah.
And like, and I want to be careful. Like sometimes a traditional way to do it is the right way to do it. Like we have done
from
deals.
2020 to 2021, going about a traditional way was the best way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, are you going to go tell a seller, hey, I'm getting 2.9 from a bank. I want you to carry a note at 2%. No.
Yeah.
Use the bank.
I was like, that makes
the bank is the best way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, absolutely. I mean, we pull levers based on circumstances and you try and make a win for everybody involved. I mean, I never want to pull a lever that's going to make somebody else lose either. Yeah. So again, being above board on everything and exactly like what you said, I think that's very important.
And I want to finish with, I think what I want to close with is like, I think people listening to this kind of come from all different spectrums, and some people will be way more advanced in their careers than we are and have done a ton of deals. And like, I hope we can interview those people. We have 2 open seats here. If anybody listening, like, come on, we'd love to talk to you.
Yep.
But for people that are just getting started, there's a lot of terms, there's a lot of different concepts, a lot of different ideas. And hopefully we help break things down to like a more simple basis for people to understand. But like speaking for myself, I've not been doing that this long. I mean, the first 2 years of my real estate career, I was in development working on one project. It's really been the last like 12 months that I've been focused in this space. And it's amazing just like saturating yourself in a business, like how quickly you can pick these things up.
Yeah.
And so I don't want anybody to feel like, oh, that's just, it's too much. Like I can't get into it. Like there's a lot of different ways to get into this business. And really quickly, like you will figure out if you are bringing in a creative approach and thinking about it from what you talked about, like the different levers, like where are the different levers? Just be aware of those things and be able to identify them and even like write them down. Like, okay, like this is how we, seller carry, this is how we can implement this. This is how it works, right? And then start figuring out how to put those pieces together. Like you'll be amazed how quick you're able to compile like a portfolio and start doing deals. And I think I'm like attracting different people. Like I think one of the things for you, obviously like the faith component for us is huge. And so that's been something that's really pulled us together, but just our creative mindsets too.
Yeah.
Being able to like look at deals and like not just be so black and white about things. Yeah. Like there's so many different ways that we could approach and do this. So anyway, I just want to send that encouragement out. Also super excited for this. This is podcast 1.
One of one.
One of one. like we're off.
Yep.
Maybe we'll do a second one right now. Like, let's get into it. Let's do it. I love it. But super appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
And let's keep doing this thing.
Let's do it.